Hello and welcome everyone to Bios and Bookmarks, an online reading series powered by the NGC Bocas Lit Fest. I'm Anna Lucy Smith and I'm joined today by the award-winning Jamaican writer and environmental activist, Diana McCauley. Diana is the author of 4 novels and her 5th will be out in September 2020 from Peepal Tree Press. It's called Daylight Come. And I'm feeling particularly privileged that we have the opportunity to hear her read from this novel today before it even hits bookshelves. I think you'll all be happy to know from now, though, before you hear the reading, that the book is actually available to pre-order from Peepal Tree Press's website. And we'll be sure to add a link down below for you. So welcome, Diana. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Hi, Anna. Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
I hope that it's as nice and sunny in Kingston as it is here in Port of Spain, despite bad weather alerts all week. But it's nice and we have a sunshiny set, so that's good, not too gloomy. And daylight is a big theme in your novel, and I'm excited to hear you read from it. I'd like you to introduce it a little bit, and then you can read your excerpt for us so everybody could get a taste.
Okay, so Daylight Come started, I guess, 3 summers ago when I read a story about people who are working on construction sites in the Middle East, just sort of falling off ladders, falling off scaffolding because of the heat. And so that sort of lodged in the back of my mind, as things do, you know. And then this was followed by one day being caught in a traffic jam on a big road in Jamaica that there was road construction. And we were stuck there for a long time and it was really hot. And I started noticing the people who were outside, you know, who were either trying to direct traffic or actually working on the road. And I started thinking about, well, what would happen if it became so hot that you couldn't go outside during the day to, you know, an island like Jamaica or other tropical countries. You know, you couldn't dig a road, you couldn't grow food, you know, you maybe couldn't walk very easily. And so that was sort of in my mind. And then I thought, well, suppose that happened, then you had to turn things around. So the only time people could work was in the night. And they had to sleep during the day. And suppose there was a young woman, teenager, who just couldn't sleep. And that's the sort of idea that was behind Daylight Come, a situation where something we take absolutely for granted, that we work during the daylight hours and go to sleep at night, if that was turned on its head. So that was the kernel of the idea of Daylight Come. I'll just tell you a little bit about. So essentially, it's a story of a 14-year-old girl called Sorrel and her mother, who's named Bibi. And I'm going to read from both characters. And they live in a fictional island called Bajaku in the capital city of Bana. And Sorrel convinces her mother that they should leave for the hills. They should try and get higher where it is cooler, where hopefully they can live in a more normal kind of way, sleep at night and grow food, work in the day. Maybe there'd even be a little rain. So that's the basic premise of the book. And I'm going to read right from the beginning. And the person speaking is Sorrel, 14-year-old Sorrel. The house she now lived in with her mother was on Buttercup Avenue in the capital city of Bana. Desperate people had thought that the old place names of long annihilated native peoples could save them. But still, the cities had drowned and the rivers had dried up, the land had burned and shook, and the dust from 1,000 deserts had taken to the air in rolling storms. After that, there was a burst of flower naming of roads and airports and hotels and the dominant buildings in the city. I didn't want you to be soft like a daisy or a rose. I wanted you spiky or red, not pale, Bibi had told her. And you were born in December, which used to be the picking time for Sorrel. Sorrel had only ever seen images of her namesake flower, and most of the buildings and roads named after flowers were now derelict and without signage. Like nearly all the still occupied houses on Bajaku, the roof was a slightly slanted concrete slab. This was the law after the hurricane season of '63, an easy law to enforce, because after 2 Category 5s hit the island that year, there were no houses with other kinds of roofs left standing. The miners sent their machines into the hills and dug down the white limestone. They scooped up the sand from rivers, and the cement factories ran day and night. The houses built after '63 had underground cisterns to catch rainwater, virtually useless now as there was so little rain. The best houses had a solid impermeable membrane on the slab roof, complicated drainage systems, a ledge to hold in the turf life, and succulents planted from end to end, half shaded by solar panels. They looked like cartoon characters with square faces, blank eyes, and thorny hair. And Sorrel liked the intricate shapes of the succulents and the way they needed no care. Up there on the roofs, those plants either lived or died. A thick bank of succulents could lower the temperature in a house by 3 degrees. To stop people stealing them, you had to apply for a permit to own a ladder, but very few were granted. Sorrel went into the kitchen and opened one of the makeshift shutters. They used to have glass windows, but Bibi said they were dangerous because they magnified heat. The house gave a little gasp, as if pressure had built up inside during the day. She wanted to feel cooler air on her face, but nothing was moving outside. She gazed at the sky, hoping to see the moon and stars, but it was too cloudy. There were always thin clouds now, which was good, because without clouds there would be no rain ever, and no water, and the rays of the sun would be even more deadly. But she still sometimes wished she could see a clear sky. She fastened the window half open. If only she could sleep. Her mother sat at the kitchen table, her shoulders slumped, and Sorrel saw the small hump on her spine that indicated her age, and she felt a flutter of fear in her chest. Old people were not treated kindly on Bajaku. Although Bibi was only a child at the time of the convergence, all the mid-century anger at people who had ignored the signs of the coming crisis were directed, even now, at anyone over 40. Her Grammy had been beaten in the street more than once, simply because she was of that time. People always need someone to blame, Grammy had said, sitting at the table, blood trickling down her jawline. So I'll stop there from Sorrel. And now I'll give you a little bit of Bibi's voice. And I forgot to say in the beginning, it's this book is set in 2084. So not that far in the future, but not next week either. So here's Bibi. They call it different things: change, then crisis, followed by emergency. Then they change it to disruption, then disaster. In the end, it didn't matter. Finally, we never knew who they were, realized that the worsening climate converged with poverty, geography, and history. So now they call it the convergence. I was 11 and lived with my parents in the foothills overlooking Bana. Higher elevations were cooler, so we were luckier than others, and I believed we deserved it. Every night, my mother and father watched good-looking men and women on television report on melting ice, swirling snowstorms, cities swallowed by earthquakes. We saw people washed away by rivers that broke their banks, taking villages with them. We watched whole islands drown. All of this was far away. I thought the news was boring and had nothing to do with us. The decapitated mountains were not ours, nor were the children swept away by raging water. But I remember the sizzling morning I went to Ray Wharf with my mother and saw the fishers leaning against the rum shop, the women facing them with empty baskets, their faces slicked with sweat. No more fish, the men said, but we have a few sea eggs. My mother responded that we were not that desperate. Not long after, the crops began failing and the fruit trees stopped bearing. We tried to grow some things in our garden, but they all died. I remember this one pumpkin vine which produced a flower and then a pumpkin. My parents watched it as if they were tending a sick child, and then one morning it was gone. Someone too hungry to wait, my father said. After that, the vine withered and died. The city water supply failed in Bana, and I went with my father to the Amma River, which still had pools of water. Thousands of people lined its crumbling banks carrying containers. Rich people put pumps in the pools and sucked them dry into tanks in the back of their trucks. I remember we had to walk a long way to find a pool that was not stirred up. I don't remember the journey back to our car with my water bucket full, but it must have been difficult. I went to school until I was 15. I was good at tech support. Halfway through my final year, though, the power supply could no longer support air conditioning. I never went back. I remember the cars strewn around Bana after the roads melted until a storm lifted them and cast them into the sea. They stopped giving hurricanes human names the year of the Cat 5s. That storm was Theta 24. So we became trapped in cycles of flood and drought. The animals we let loose to roam and graze the almost barren land mostly starved and died, then shriveled into ash. The pigs and dogs that survived banded together in feral packs and began to hunt and feed on us. We tried poison and traps, but they bred too fast. Then it became too hot to go outside in the day, and the dust storms started. I won't ever forget those early days when the sun began to blind and kill. Our neighbor, Nima, was the first I knew to die. A quiet, soft-spoken woman made cantankerous by thirst and hunger. She tried to scratch out her husband's eyes, and he threw her out. All we heard was the bang of the front door and then her screams. No one opened their doors to her, and I did not ask my parents why. I still think of my father and the way he died. He was out all night at the seawall foraging for food, and daylight caught him there. He tried to get into one of the dawn bunkers, which still existed then, but the people inside would not open the door. They shouted to him that there was no more room. I never saw his body, and I don't know how the domins who brought the news knew who he was, because there was nothing left. All they gave my mother was his wedding ring. For a long time, I thought about his bones. I didn't believe the sun could destroy bones, at least not so quickly, and I imagined the gold ring loose around a finger bone against the blackened dust. I also thought about the food he might have found, which we did not get. I wondered who would have taken the food and left his ring. I didn't witness what the sun could do to people until after Sorrel was born, and I was always sorry she saw it too. Now, my headstrong daughter, my only child, wants to abandon the safety of the dark. I tell her the tribals don't exist. They are a myth that the young have created to hang on to hope. But the Toplanders, now they're real. I've seen classified reports about the Toplanders and their raids on young lowlander females to use as slaves. The raiders are led by a cruel, reckless man the reports call the Colonel. I told her about Eshan, a girl her age who disappeared while she was out searching for food, and we knew it was the Domins who'd caught and sold her to the Toplanders. And there was Amaryllis, snatched from her doorstep in the presence of her parents, and never heard from again. What I know for sure is that in this time of killing heat and hunger, there is no safety anywhere. Every day the sun comes up, and it will blind or kill us if there is not a roof over our heads. Every day the Domins are on the hunt for young women, and the ferals can surround us and tear us apart. I'm 45, and the end is coming fast for me. What use am I without my daughter? Maybe the only thing I can give her is a chance to escape this hell. And to die with her would be better than to die alone.
Thank you, Diana. Wow, I'm glad you read from that part of the novel, because everything after that is non-stop action. And we don't want any spoilers, because I want everybody who's going to read this novel to feel the same edge of the seat feeling that I had throughout, from this point where Bibi gives us the context. After that, when they leave their home, it's just gripping, fast-paced action. We're joined by quite an international audience here to hear you, Diana. So welcome to all of our viewers. And if you're just tuning in, this is Bios and Bookmarks with Diana McCauley, who's just read an excerpt from her upcoming novel, Daylight Come. So we're going to say hello to Loretta Collins-Kloba in Puerto Rico, Jonathan Chambers in London, England, Marilyn McCauley-Bogle in Toronto, Canada, Ifiona Fulani in Brooklyn. Welcome. And to all the new watchers, thank you for tuning in. This is, as I said, a gripping novel. And almost, it seems unimaginable that 60 years in the future, just 2 generations ahead of us, that this could be a picture of what the Caribbean could be like, where islands have completely drowned. Every hurricane is a Category 5 hurricane. Our sunlight, our Caribbean sun can literally incinerate you if you step outside in daylight. I'm very curious to know, Diana, how much of this future that you paint is built from research that you did for your writing and any actual science of climate change?
Right, a lot, because, I have this this other life as an environmental activist. And so a lot of it was based in things that were either projected to happen or were already happening. So I was quite careful about making things possible or even likely. But I made that island fictional because I wanted to pick and choose between different kinds of possibilities. So I imagined, I didn't want a completely dystopian world because I imagined that some form of technology would be used to help. So I had this idea of, yes, we'd still have power because we had decentralized solar grid, solar options. And, there has been a lot of work on jellyfish as a source of food and protein, and algae, for us to eat if our crops start to fail. So I tried to put together this mix of, reality, things already happening here, because right now you can see very high temperatures in different parts of the world. We know we're expecting a more active hurricane season than usual. And we know there's already talk about needing a category 6 for the force of hurricanes. So I wanted to put together this mix of things that were already happening, projected to happen, or perhaps at the outer edge of what's possible. And I didn't want it so far in the future that people would push it away from them and say this is too far away to worry about. My time as an environmental activist made me call into question how effective science has been at communicating the urgency of this message, because I think it hasn't been very effective. And this is why I want to turn to stories. And I want to turn to stories set in island nations in the Caribbean so that we can really start appreciating what this could mean for us as island dwellers. So a lot of it's real. Now that the book's finished, and of course it was this moving target as I was writing it, because something would happen and I think, I have to change that. But now that it's finished, and I sort of watch the headlines, and I often think, but this is in my book, the dust storms and the hazards and the difficulties working outside and the possibilities of food supplies failing. Yeah, kind of a rip from this thing.
I read this right after we had what I would call the massive dust cloud covering Port of Spain. We had the Sahara dust enveloping the Caribbean just a month or two ago, and it's been on and off since then. And then I read your novel with, these dust clouds and rain bombs. And I thought, God, I think we have a rain bomb every lunchtime nowadays. It feels very real. Some of the scenes that you set, they don't feel that far off to what we're experiencing now. Yet the whole of the societal infrastructure is broken down. There's a lot of violence and people are angry. People are very angry in this world that you're writing. Do you feel that you're writing this story almost as a warning or like a wake up call then for us who, those your readers, especially if you're looking at your readership as being young adults, which was originally the target audience of this manuscript when you won a CODE Burt Award for Caribbean Young Adult Literature back in 2019, and since then you've obviously done a lot of work on the novel. So I wonder, with your audience in mind, is it a kind of a wake up call message?
That's what I hope. I hope most of all to engage people's imaginations and to not have them thinking that this is something that's so far away that it's not important. And also, the difficulty with climate change, and speak as an advocate now, is that it seems like this very enormous problem that's caused, it's a geopolitical problem, is caused by governments. And so it's very little that an individual can do. And that I think is one of the things that lets people sort of just push it away from them because they don't think it's something they can affect. But actually governments and power structures are moved by people. So I wanted to engage people's imaginations enough to make them say, you know what, I don't want to sit on the sidelines anymore. So it is actually a warning. It's actually think about what could happen, the things that we take for granted. Think about how those things could be just not exist anymore. We're living through a pandemic now. I think if someone had told us all the things that we've seen happen over the last 5 or 6 months, we might have said, no, that's really unlikely. But here we are, we're facing it. And, I had classes on pandemics caused by the spillover of diseases from animals into humans back in 2000. We've known this for a long time. but we haven't paid any attention. So I guess that's what I want. Pay attention, guys. These islands that we all say we love, and we're very proud of being Caribbean peoples, they're under threat.
Yes, I think we can feel that. And I have to say, for me as a reader, it was very jarring to see the pandemic of 2020 referenced quite casually in this novel as, the catalyst for borders closing and basically never reopening. And it's sort of, even in reading it, I kind of blinked and said, could that be? Like, I mean, is it that, reading it in reading this novel in July of 2020, and what will it be a year from now? And it's just kind of referenced casually within a whole scope of a future that's quite terrifying for us as Caribbean people. It's something you mentioned in your author's note that I was really intrigued by was your use of Indigenous language in the novel, the place setting. So you've set it in a fictional Caribbean island, but the place names are taken from Taino words, and there's some use of Taino language and Indigenous language throughout the novel. I wonder if you could talk about that a little bit and what inspired that use of language.
So I'm kind of obsessed with naming. And I think all through the Caribbean, there's, these names that are they really resonate with me. Often they're names of the colonists or conquerors, back to their realities and stuff. So I've always wanted to sort of locate the Caribbean and describe it by using the words of the first peoples who were here. And I imagine too that, that we often rename places as well, to reflect new realities. And I wanted to sort of say, well, suppose everything was breaking down. Would whatever government existed want to go back to a time when, there was not this kind of world? Would they hark back to, really to the people who were originally here and had found a way to live in, a less harmful way on these islands? And so that's why, and I didn't think I would really find any Taino language, but boy, the internet's amazing. And I didn't really worry too much about its accuracy.
Okay.
I just, look, here's it. I found this website. It has all these Taino names. I knew some of them. And I decided, well, that's what I'll use. It'll give me a sort of thread of, first of all, talking about naming, and then secondly, this harking back to a different way of relating to a Caribbean island, which, to the extent that we know about the Tainos, we think they did,
Right. And so you use the internet as a source for your research. And I mean, I've told you this before, but I mean, this is the first, I'm an avid reader of dystopian fiction. I mean, this is my genre. I love it. I enjoy it. I like the future worlds, and I like the bleakness, and I like knowing that it could be, but is not yet, but this is the first one I have read like this, set in the Caribbean. And I don't know if you and your bookshelf have anything like that, already that influenced this, or other dystopian Caribbean novels that maybe you reference or were inspiring to in any way. We're cataloging right now our 100 Caribbean books that made us as one of our Bocas Lit Fest projects. And we're asking all of our authors, what books have influenced and shaped you as a writer, as a reader. And I'm curious if anything has shaped this work or any of your past novels.
Well, this work, no, I'd have to say, because I'm not really a big reader of dystopian fiction. Since writing Daylight Come, I suddenly started to read this dystopian fiction. So I recently read a lot of Jemison, I've read Octavia Butler. So I've now started to read more dystopian fiction than I used to. And I'm struck by some things that I did not know were trends or were features of dystopian fiction, like the retreat to the hills, And I'm actually sort of thinking about an essay about that, how there's something about mountains and hills that calls us, and that there are places where perhaps we can live in more respectful ways. So I'd say there weren't a lot of written influences on the writing of this book. You asked me about whether this audience is a young adult audience, and I guess I started working on the book, and then the Burt Prize came up, which I'd entered before, and Gone to Drift had come second, I think, in it. Yes. And I used the prize as a kind of goal. I'm a very goal-directed person, so get this finished and send it to Burt. But at the stage that I submitted it, I wasn't 100% sure it was going to end up being a young adult book. And I learned in writing Gone to Drift that there are actually rules about young adult books. And I felt like I wanted to break them. So I thought, well, maybe it won't be young adult, but I do want young people to read it because I very genuinely feel that this is not really a fight for someone my age. I won't live to see the worst impacts of this. I mean, I might have a very unpleasant old age, but my young years won't be affected by this. So I really hope young people will read it. In terms of influences, so I'm of the age that there was not much Caribbean fiction in school, right? I remember us reading Andrew Salke as this is before high school, and I remember one book called Hurricane. And it's funny that I remember this one thing in it, which I think has kind of guided my life in a way. The character's house get mashed up in a hurricane, and the father says to the son, "Big men don't cry, they plan." And I thought, well, he's talking to men, but I'm going to take that on, you know. And so I'm a planner. We got a House of Mr. Biswas, BS Naipaul at A level. So that was a set book, and that was the first time I read something that I can remember where the Caribbean just burst out of the pages of a book. So up to that point, I had not read anything that spoke to the place where I lived. No, I think now would be different, but then there really wasn't an emphasis in school on Caribbean writing. I read, and I don't remember in what particular order, but I read early The Children of Sisyphus, Orlando Patterson. And, you know, House of Mr. Biz was set in Trinidad. At that point, I'd never been to another Caribbean island, but The Children of Sisyphus was Jamaica, was my home. And it was really eye-opening for me and harrowing book to read. So I remember that really well. And I think that was an influence on my first book, Dog Heart. Okay. White Sargasso Sea by Jean Rhys was the first time I guess I thought of myself as Creole, you know, and that was gave me a lot of food for thought as well. And then the other book that I think has been a real strong influence is Olive Senior's Summer Lightning. It's this collection of, you know, short stories on the Caribbean. The one I remember best is Country of the One-Eyed God. And there's a little speech in there about, you know, all your generation who is beating and chastisement. So that was, I guess, more of a life influence than a literary influence. I determined I would not resort to beating and chastisement.
Diana, a lot of people agree with you because several of those books that you've named have been our top mentions in the 100 Caribbean Books campaign. Olive Senior is there, obviously V.S. Naipaul. I mean, and these are books that resonate with Caribbean audiences at home and abroad. I mean, your book has obviously resonated already with people listening to your reading. Emma Caroline Lewis says, the decline of society and degradation, lack of empathy and the survival of fittest, exaggeration of the class divide, vividly expressed, you know, referring to your reading there. And Shy Gibson, this novel is really gripping and something I wish could be in Caribbean schools. We mentioned, you know, at your time, the lack of Caribbean literature in schools and stuff that you saw yourself in. So I wish this could be in Caribbean schools to stimulate the ideas for solution-based living among young people. Yeah, it's powerful to see these ideas put across, especially when it's in a setting that we know, our Caribbean home. You know, it's so important to see our environment and our world expressed, you know, by Caribbean writers. I think your reading was really powerful and people are commenting. We have Inna Vanderbroek. Apologies if I've said the name wrong. She says, I agree. I'm a biologist and we are mainly preaching to the choir, you know, so with the, right. Yeah, we need to reach a wider audience with the kind of the stories that maybe this is exactly the way to do it, as you say, through the storytelling, reaching that heart of the Caribbean people where we love to hear stories, you know. I think continue.
No, it's just, as I said, I just don't think the science is really doing that job for us, you know. Right. And I hope, you know, even though I fictionalized this island that my book is set on, I hope Jamaicans might recognize some of the places, or at least question, is that such and such a place? And then imagine what it looks like now as described in Daylight Come. So that's sort of what I'm hoping as well. I'm hoping that people will read these pages and then transpose the images in their minds onto their own real places. And I'm hoping for being horrified.
I think, and we talked about it being whether it's young adult literature. And I mean, there are very mature themes in this novel, as you would expect from a dystopian novel from, and there is violence, there are references to torture, but at the same time, it is an important work, I think, for younger audiences. It's certainly age appropriate and accessible, I think, for a teenage audience. It can easily be still categorized as young adult, even with a strong protagonist voice from the mother, Bibi, who gives the background in your reading. And so it would be interesting to see whether a book like this would ever be considered in a school curriculum, given what we know to be the restrictions in our school environment and, the tendency towards censorship when we deal with our Caribbean youth, which is so ironic considering how mature and the experiences many of our children are growing up with on these islands. So, I mean, I advocate against censorship in all way and form. And I think that novels like this will open up conversations that are important to have with the younger generations. Would you like to read another little short piece for us, Diana?
Sure. So I'll read a bit of the pace bit then. Okay, now I've given you some background.
Yes.
Okay. So Bibi and Sorrel have left Bana. They have to leave at night, obviously, because it's too hot to travel in the day, and there's all these dangers that I described. So they've left, and they are trying to find an old aqueduct, which they think will lead them into higher ground. They saw no sign of a track leading down the hill. Perhaps no one else had thought of the old aqueduct as a trail to anywhere. Sorrel squatted. The soil was sandy and loose where they stood, and she could see rocks and a few very small cacti close by, too small to reap even if they'd had the space to carry them. It's an abyss, Sorrel said. We go down sideways, Bibi replied. Her boot slipped, but she caught her balance. Maybe we should go back, Sorrel said. There's time. We can find a place tomorrow night. No, Bibi said. We've decided. We've made a plan. You hold the plaque. Your balance is probably better than mine. The plaque is their bit of technology. They slipped and slid down the slope, led by the plaque's small light, directed at their feet to avoid turning an ankle. They could not look ahead. They did not know where the hill ended or if they were going in the right direction. Sorrel felt her thighs stiffening from the movement of walking downhill, and she wondered how her mother was doing. Bibi was ahead, testing each foothold before transferring her weight. It was good not to be alone in the darkness. They heard their own scraping, tentative steps and the fall of loose stones. At least there were no more mosquitoes on the lowlands. But maybe they had survived in the mountains, and if they had, there would be fevers. Her breath was now coming hard. Sorrel looked up at the sky, searching for any signs of the coming dawn. Bibi stopped. The night was impenetrable, not the velvet black of old-time night skies salted with stars. She'd only ever seen pictures of those, but the dark gray of dust from those far-off places that had lost all their water. What would happen to them if there was a dust storm? Come on, Bibi said, as if she had not been the one to stop. The incline had become less steep. Sorrel turned the black searchlight on to sweep the landscape, and her mother did not object. Rocks everywhere. What chance was there that they would stumble upon the aqueduct in the darkness? Maybe this was the last night of her life. Would dying of heat stroke hurt? Would it burn like the searing rock on her cheek? Might have been better to be caught in the frozen parts of the world, she thought. Freezing seemed less painful than burning. All they could see of the land was shape and shadow, the hard, smooth silhouettes of rocks, the spiky, irregular outline of stunted plants. What would happen when houses and higher ground ran out? Turn off the searchlight, Bibi said. The land was flatter now, and they began walking faster. A giant rock loomed to their left. Let's rest for a bit over there, Bibi said, pointing. Have a little drink. Do we have time? We can't just blunder around until it's a day. Sorrel felt chastised, and the small moment of gladness at her mother's company evaporated. Bibi led the way to the rock which loomed above their heads. It was nestled into the slope on one side, jutting out smooth and round like something man-made. What's holding this rock in place, Bibi said. Why didn't it get washed away? Who cares? It's big, that's probably why. Not too big for a rain bomb. There must be some kind of obstacle. Bibi's voice trailed off as she ran her fingers along the rock. Bring the plaque over here. Sorrel shrugged her backpack off, and the loss of its weight made her feel light. She joined her mother, and in the plaque's light, they saw there was a gap behind the rock. See, nothing's holding it, Sorrel said. Let's go. But feel here, at the back. It hasn't been smoothed by water. So what? Everything that could be shelter matters, Bibi said, staring at the space behind the rock. Sorrel looked at the clock on the plaque, minutes to midnight. They'd been walking for close to 4 hours and had not yet found the aqueduct. We need to shh. What's that noise? Bibi hissed. I don't hear. Climb now, Bibi yelled. What? Sorrel heard a low, rumbling growl coming from behind them. Guata, Sorrel, her mother cursed. Climb when I tell you. Sorrel hesitated, and her mother grabbed her hand, pulling her towards the gap in the rock. She looked over her shoulder and saw something low racing out of the dark. Feral. You go first, Sorrel cried as they squeezed into the narrow space behind the rock. She stuffed the plaque inside her clothes. Bibi didn't argue. She found footholds and climbed. Hurry, Sorrel panted. Her legs were exposed. She heard a snarl and scrabbling at the base of the rock, and the feral's teeth closed on her right boot. She kicked. If they lost her boot, they were dead. Something bounced against the rock. She heard the animal yip, and her boot was free. She began to climb. She saw her mother's extended hand, but ignored it. Did it bite you? Are you bleeding? Bibi demanded. I don't think so. It had my boot. Guata, I left my backpack in the open. Everything is in it. She realized Bibi's pack was also gone. You threw your pack at it? Yes. There was nothing else. We've lost everything on the first night, except the plaque and a little water. We needed to fight it off. Let's wait for a bit. They sat back to back, knees to chest. The feral snuffled and barked below. It's going to get into the packs while we're waiting, Sorrel said. And if it gets the rest of our water and food, we'll die. I know, but the packs are sturdy. Let's think. Is it only one canine? Ferals aren't usually alone. One bit my boot. That's all I know. They waited, listening and watching the sky for signs of lightning. Sorrel's fear ebbed. If the choice was between frying on the rock and being torn apart by ferals, she knew which she'd choose. People used to be burned at the stake, she remembered from history module. Maybe their nerves shut down, and apart from the first scorching, they felt nothing after that. She offered her mother a drink from her alga skin and had a sip herself. Her breathing slowed, and she looked around at the landscape, slowly revealing itself. Rocks and sand and shadow. One backpack, not far from them, still intact. No sign of the feral.
Thank you, Diana. So Shivani Ramlochan has a great question for us. She says, thanks for this great discussion, Diana and Anna. You're welcome, Shivani. And Diana, as a vocal environmental activist, are you hopeful for the continued emergence of eco-Caribbean fiction and creative writing? What do you think eco-fiction brings us that other more traditional genres don't quite capture?
Thanks for the question, Shivani. Yes, I am hopeful that we'll see more of this kind of fiction. I'm a bit want to avoid the kind of genre idea, because what I think we need to understand about these kinds of threats is how they pervade every aspect of our societies, and not just our societies, but the entire world. So I am hopeful that we'll start to pay more attention to the threats to place in Caribbean fiction. And I think there's quite a lot already. In fact, when, in answering a question from a reviewer about whether there have been other types of explicitly climate change fiction in the Caribbean, I compiled quite a long list of books that have a sort of threat to the environment aspect to them. So I hope that more and more we'll start to see, Caribbean fiction, I think, is very explicitly set in place. There's a lot of attention to the place itself, and in much of Caribbean fiction, place almost assumes the aspect of a character. And I hope we'll start to see more of how threatened this place that we all say we love is in our stories. And I guess that's one of the reasons why N.K. Jemisin's her Broken Earth trilogy, which is actually introduced to me by Ife, so she's still there. Thanks for that. Which is when the whole planet starts to fight against the humans, So I do want to see that more of that kind of thing, and I think it is going to come, because more and more this is our present day reality. This is not something that is off in the future.
Right. And we had some good book recommendations coming in the comments as well. Emma Caroline Lewis says The Road is a great dystopian novel. That's one of my favorites, actually. And Loretta Collins Klober mentions Tobias Buckell, who's a Caribbean author of speculative fiction. She says that he has a dystopian climate change novel, and at least one of them she thinks is set in the Caribbean. I do know that he has a series starting with a book called Hurricane Fever. So maybe that's another good one for our viewers to look up. So we have some exciting literature, some books to add to our to be read pile, yes. Definitely. Yes, it's going to keep us busy for a long time, and hopefully we see a lot more coming out of our region like this. I mean, we have amazing writers. We have our NGC Bocas Lit Fest coming up in September, and it's going to be virtual. So everybody from all over the world can tune in and see the best of what the Caribbean has to offer. And we are going to have a segment featuring speculative fiction as well. So I'm curious to see if any of this climate change conversation comes out of what's being written these days in speculative fiction in the region. Now, Diana, that since you've been following this segment, that we like to hit you with an option at the end of 3 questions. Yeah. So we have question 1, 2, and 3. And you're going to pick which one you'd like to answer. So 1, 2, or 3. I've got my 3 envelopes here, and you can take the question of your choice.
You mean just say 1, 2, or 3?
Yep, 1, 2, or 3. That's all you know. 1, 2, or 3. And you can tell us, and I'll pick the question from the envelope.
Okay, let's go with 2.
Question number 2. Okay. What does the envelope hold? So, Diana, as sobering as daylight come is, what is one thing that brings you joy when you think of the future of the Caribbean? That's a great question.
Joy. Okay. So one of the things I think about being an island person is, and this was a comment that was made to me by an American Peace Corps volunteer who worked with the Jamaica Environment Trust for 3 years. She said to me that Jamaica was all the problems of the world writ small on a scale that you could manage. And she talked to me about how rewarding she found her time in Jamaica, because she felt like she had made a big difference. She said to me, I wouldn't just be able to walk into an American school and start delivering an environmental education program, which is something Jamaica Environment Trust did. I wouldn't ever go to a meeting with, politicians or decision makers. And so you have all these problems of the world on this rich, small scale that can be managed. So that's one aspect of being in the Caribbean that makes me think that the future for us is not as bleak as it might be for big continents. And the other thing, this is not true of all Caribbean islands, but for the larger ones in Jamaica and even some of the smaller ones, we're incredibly diverse for islands, for the most part, with lots of different types of landscape and flora and fauna and different elevations and, different kinds of coastline. So I think about it being possible, even desirable, for us to have different kinds of lives that are more grounded in things that are authentically Caribbean. And the thought of that gives me joy, because I think for too long we have been seduced by aspirations that are not our own. They've kind of been grafted on top of what we've been told to want. And I think it's worse in a way with, this sort of ubiquity of social media and all other kinds of influences that are affecting what makes us happy. So I think about lives in a small island where it is possible, because of the different kinds of natural environment that are present, to have realer lives, truer lives where important things matter, where we ground ourselves back into this, our one and only home, this place that we come from that we're seeing so badly affected. And, you talked a little bit about seeing the pandemic in the book, and, the things that gave me a hard time in it was whether or not to have borders closed and how likely was that, And actually the pandemic gave me permission to say, well, yes, look at that. You know, it just depends on what happens. But yes, you know, large countries who don't want a bunch of climate refugees, you know, just pouring over borders and stuff are more than capable of just closing their borders and leaving us on your own. And then I further thought, what about if they want to come here?
Yes. I mean, and I think that's a little clue as to what maybe you see happen to what within this novel as well, with those tables turning. And I would say before we finish as well, you know, we've been talking a lot about heavy issues, and, you know, it's dystopia, it's bleak, it's a very hard life, and Bibi and Sorrel are on a struggle. It's a struggle, this journey that they're going to. Just survival is a struggle. But I think you end on a fairly hopeful note. There's some sense of them being able to settle, find a way of life that will work, rebuild a community or society, which is a nice way to end, in a way that there is a future, a hopeful future, even in the worst of circumstances. There is hope, although there is danger still looming and struggle still looming. You know, it's certainly not, as I said, I almost wondered 3/4 way through this novel, how on earth is this going to end? You know, how could it end in this world that you've built? Like, there is no end, you know, this is just going to go on and on. And I felt that feeling of, she's going to have to be a really good writer to tie this up. And you did, and you really did. And it's brought together in just the right spot. I think it ends in that note, where as a reader, it's where I wanted to see it end. I felt satisfied, but still wanting more. So I think it's excellent. It's really an excellent novel that I enjoyed every minute reading it. And, you know, I have to make that time for reading with my 2 little kids at home and everything day to day happening. Yet it's a book that stayed in my mind. I was waiting to go back and finish reading and finding out what happens. So I really encourage everybody listening, watching us now, to head straight to Peepal Tree Press's website and pre-order your own copy of this book. It's important reading for us as Caribbean people. I think it's a book that will be enjoyed by teenagers in our lives, as well as those of us who are fully grown. And we'll enjoy it. Trust me, I enjoyed it a lot. And it was eye-opening in some ways. And to be honest, Diana, I'm quite terrified that you say some of it is based on the climate change science. I was hoping that you would answer that question with, oh, you know, it's a lot of my imagination and skill as a writer. So that is eye-opening to me as well. And I'm grateful to you for writing this and bringing attention to these issues. It's something we all in the region need to pay closer attention to, I think. So thank you so much for the work that you're doing, for joining us here today. Let me see if we have any other comments.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, we do have one last comment from Rach May, I think so. Again, sorry if I say your name wrong. Thank you for this excellent reading. I can't wait to get my hands on this new novel. Thank you so much for tuning in, to everybody listening, and we hope that you keep tuning in to Bios and Bookmarks. Diana, thank you for your time, for your reading, and for all your energy towards our environment and our literature.
Thank you, Anna. Thanks for having me. It was great.
Thank you. Okay, bye everybody. This is